She accidentally left her letter of secret fantasies on the Mafia boss's desk. Now he won't stop teasing her for years. Ivy Holloway buried her longing for the most dangerous man in Chicago. So when she finally wrote a secret letter, full of confessions and fantasies about Adrian Moretti, it never crossed her mind that anyone would read it. Him least of all. It happened over one absurd slip. Adrian demanded some urgent documents. Ivy snatched up the papers in a rush and dropped everything on his desk. She understood too late that, buried among the Mafia contracts, lay the one page that should never have reached his hands. By the time she went back for the letter, Adrian had already read every last word, and the worst part wasn't watching him turn furious. It was watching him smile. Because from that day on, the Mafia boss had a new favorite pastime, reminding her that he knew exactly what she pictured whenever she thought of him. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout-out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Letter That Should Have Stayed Buried. The bottle was down past its middle by the time I admitted the truth to myself. I wasn't going to sleep until I'd betrayed myself in some small, private way first. Thursday night, well after 11, and the apartment in Lincoln Park held the particular quiet of a woman who's lived alone long enough to stop calling it temporary. The heater ticked against the wall with an almost domestic patience. Thin rain slid down the glass and trailed off across the bare balcony. I sat on the couch with the laptop balanced on my knees, barefoot, the hole in my sock gaping at the big toe, the same sock I'd promised to throw out weeks ago and hadn't, like everything else I kept postponing. 5 years. 5 years answering the phones for Adrian Moretti, juggling calendars that rearranged themselves 3 times before a single meeting was through, reserving tables at restaurants that had only ever existed as a name scrawled on a napkin. 5 years learning the language of his smallest gestures, the way he cradled a whiskey glass when a meeting had gone wrong, the way he laid his pen flat before he said no, the way he called me by my surname when his patience had run out, and by my full name when it hadn't. 5 years aging quietly in the chair of the antechamber on the 47th floor of a tower in the Loop, beside a man who barely lifted his eyes when I brought his coffee, yet always seemed to know, without ever turning his head, exactly how many steps I'd taken between his door and his desk. I crossed the room to top up the glass again. The floorboards were cold underfoot. The kitchen was colder still, the microwave clock blinking the wrong hour ever since the last outage. I came back slowly, the way you move when you're afraid of waking yourself. It isn't love, I told myself. It's fatigue. It's habit. It's what happens when you spend too long breathing the same air as a man who can rearrange the breathing of an entire city without lifting a finger. I'd repeated it so often the words had worn smooth, the way a phrase does when you memorize it only to fool your own voice. That night, though, with the wine spreading warm through my chest and the taste of dark grapes clinging to the roof of my mouth, I didn't have the strength left for the lie. I opened a blank document, one more in a long line of blank documents I'd opened over the years and never had the nerve to keep. My hands found the keys on their own, like they already knew the route. I addressed it to no one. There was no point. The one person who'd ever read it never would. I wrote about how a room reorganized itself around him the moment he walked in, about the shirt sleeves pushed back below the elbow on a Friday morning, about the heavy watch on his left wrist that he rotated with his thumb whenever he was listening to something that didn't deserve a reply. I wrote about the afternoon he passed me a document, and his fingers grazed mine for less than a heartbeat, and how I'd spent the rest of that day pretending I'd forgotten the precise warmth of his skin. I wrote about what I'd do if he ever truly looked at me, not the function I performed, not the space I occupied between the fax machine and the phone, but me. I wrote about his mouth, about the silence I imagined around him in the early morning, before the world came knocking, about wanting small, absurd, ordinary things, brewing coffee for someone slow to wander into the kitchen, hearing a key turn in my own door, having one shoulder somewhere that was mine to lean on, and about wanting larger things too, things I couldn't even bring myself to name in the dark of my own living room. I never wrote his name. I didn't have to. Every comma was shaped like it. When I finally stopped, it was past 1. I read it through once, which was the mistake, because reading it again meant going on believing it was true. I saved the file under something meaningless, Draft 3, and shut the laptop with the careful violence of someone locking a cabinet on a ghost. I rinsed the glass under hot water and watched the smear of lipstick spiral down the drain. I switched off the light. I fell asleep with my hair still damp against the pillow, and the unmistakable sense that I'd done something I couldn't take back. though I had no idea yet how far it would reach. The alarm went off at 6:30. I slept straight through it. When I opened my eyes, daylight was already leaking through the badly drawn curtain, and the clock on the nightstand read 7:43. I came up out of bed like someone yanked awake by a fright. My nightgown clung to my back, damp from the night. I tripped over the ruined sock I must have peeled off in my sleep and flung into the corner without noticing. I pulled on the white blouse without ironing it, dragged the black skirt up over my hips, twisted my hair into a knot somewhere between my front door and the building's lobby, coat slung over one arm, open purse slapping against my hip with every stride. It had rained in the night, and the sidewalk smelled of wet earth and warm asphalt. I ran for the station, my heel ringing off the slick stone. I caught the L with my head down, counting the stops I could have named in my sleep, carrying that nagging feeling of having left something behind without knowing what. The Moretti Tower stood thin and black above the loop, a needle pressed into the morning. Even before the door swung open, the smell of ground coffee was pouring out of the cafe on the ground floor, where a line had already formed. I slipped in through the side entrance. The bell chimed, and Phoebe spotted me before I'd even reached the counter. "Honey," she said, swiping a cloth across the steam wand. "You've got the look of a woman who slept right through her alarm. Worse. Can't talk today, Phoebe. Lorenzo's in before 9. She was already pulling the double I never had to order, the espresso running dark down the inside of the cup, and she slid it toward me without another word. Go on. You can tell me later. I owe you. You owe me a lot." She handed it over with no lid, the way I liked it, and when I reached for my card, she just lifted her palm. On the house. It was Friday for her too, in its way. I left with the cup scalding between my fingers and crossed the lobby, heels coming down hard on the marble. The guard at the executive elevator caught sight of me from across the floor and held the door. I rode up alone, 47 floors of a silence that seemed to want something from me. The steel panel throwing back the tired reflection of a woman in a creased blouse. The antechamber lights were on. That was the first sign I was running later than I'd feared. Adrian was already inside. His door was shut, but a thin yellow line of light bled out beneath it. I dropped my coat over the chair, set the coffee on the phone's cradle, and woke the computer, which took its slow, grudging time. I muttered something at it. That was the precise moment his door opened. Holloway. His voice carried the tone I'd come to dread, not anger, a deadline. "Good morning," I said, not looking up. "The port contracts. They're on your desk." "They're not." He let the silence stretch until it had weight. "The revised version. From yesterday." I swallowed. Yesterday's revised version was on my flash drive. I'd carried it home to read on the train. Something I never did, except yesterday thinking about the office had felt easier than thinking about the empty apartment waiting for me in Lincoln Park. "Thought I'll print it now. Lorenzo's here in 12 minutes. He shut the door. He didn't slam it. Adrian never slammed anything. He closed it with the exactness of a man who understands a quiet click can land harder than a shout. I jammed the flash drive into the side port. The folder crawled open on the screen with that maddening corporate sluggishness. I clicked the contracts file. I clicked Salvatore's report. I clicked the bank attachment. And there in the corner, in the list of recently opened documents, the name draft to 3 sat blinking like a stove I'd left lit. My stomach fell 3 floors. I'd put the drive into the laptop last night, yes, but I'd saved the file to the laptop, not the drive. I was certain. I thought I was certain. The printer began heaving out pages with a drone that had never seemed so loud. 22 pages of contract, 8 of report, 4 of attachment. I scooped it all up, still warm from the drum, the sweet chemical bite of toner climbing into my nose, squared the edges against the desk, snatched the black leather folder, and pushed the stack inside. I didn't check. There was no time. The wall clock ticked from 8:58 to 8:59, and I was already up and crossing the carpet, rapping my knuckles against his door. "Come in." I stepped through. Adrian stood with his back to me at the window, hands buried in the pockets of his trousers. Behind him, the city spread out in a polite gray, the Willis Tower cutting upward in the distance. He didn't turn. I laid the folder on the leather blotter, and the low sound of hide meeting hide was the loudest thing in the room. Revised version and the attachments. Thank you. The word came out dry, the way it always did. I turned on my heel, walked out, and closed the door behind me without a sound. Back at my desk, my heart was still galloping from the rush, knocking out of time against the seam of my blouse. I took 2 swallows of coffee gone lukewarm and bitter at the back of my throat. I opened the calendar. I confirmed the meeting with Lorenzo, the dinner booked for the evening, the room held on the third floor, mechanical things, safe things. And then, reaching to drop the flash drive into the drawer, I went still. The drawer was already open. Lying inside it, on top of a stack of unopened envelopes, was a single sheet folded in thirds, the faint print of my thumb pressed into one corner. I knew the paper before I read a word of it. It was the page from Draft 3, and all at once the flash drive in my hand felt like a different object entirely. I hadn't only saved it to the laptop. In the haze of wine and exhaustion, I'd saved it to the flash drive too, without registering it. And when I'd hit print on the whole contracts folder that morning, I'd sent the letter through with everything else, never looking. It had come out of the office printer warm, buried in the middle of the contracts, and I'd packed it into the black leather folder with my own hands without turning over a single page. The breath snagged halfway up my chest. Heat rushed to my scalp and drained away cold. I stared at the closed door of Adrian Moretti's office, as though the air between us had turned to glass. Lorenzo's 12 minutes shrank to 10, then 8. I was on my feet before I'd decided to be, my legs heavier than they had any right to be. I crossed to the door. I stopped with my hand hovering over the handle, the cold metal a breath away from my palm. And from the other side of the wood, low, restrained, dragged up out of the throat of a man who hadn't made that sound in so long I almost didn't place it, I heard Adrian Moretti laugh. Chapter 2. The Smile She Had Never Seen. I held there with my hand suspended in the air long enough for the skin to go cold. Beyond the door, the low laugh faded out, and the silence flooded back in. That second silence was the worse of the two, because now I knew it had been broken by me, without my ever meaning to break it. I retreated, 2 steps. The thick gray carpet ate the sound of my heels, and even so I felt as though every motion I made was being logged by the walls of that corridor. I returned to my desk and sat down as if the chair might somehow hide me. Lorenzo Bianchi arrived 9 minutes later. Adrian's consigliere was one of those men who age in their favor. Flawless gray suit, slim-framed glasses, an old leather briefcase of the kind that had cost a small fortune 2 decades ago and was worth twice that now. He said my name in greeting, offered the faintest of smiles, knocked twice, and waited for Adrian's brief nod from inside before he entered. I didn't trust myself to glance through the gap. The door shut with that dry click of solid wood I'd known for 5 years. I stayed put. I worked. I fielded 3 calls. I booked 2 lunches that would be canceled. I answered an email from the accountant. All of it on instinct. None of it requiring thought. And the whole time the folded page in the drawer on the far side of the wall sat there with the weight of poured lead. The meeting ran 40 minutes. On his way out, Lorenzo gave me a look I couldn't decode, possibly because I didn't want to. Adrian filled the doorway moments later and let one shoulder fall against the frame. I kept my eyes down. Holloway. "Sir, look at me." I looked. That was the mistake. He'd already turned his right sleeve back once over his forearm, the black vest worn without the jacket, his dark hair combed away from his face with the precision of a man who lets nothing slip out of place. And there was a new line set into the corner of his mouth, a smile that wasn't quite a smile that already knew, "Come here a moment." I rose. My legs didn't seem to keep time with the rest of me. I went in. He closed the door behind me with the same courteous click as ever, crossed to the desk, and settled onto the edge of it rather than into the chair, arms folded. The morning light came slanting through the 47th floor window and laid a bright rectangle across the dark wood. The leather folder of contracts sat on the blotter, and beside it, lined up against some invisible ruler of his, the page, folded. One corner turned up, read, "This," he said, "is not a contract." No. It was handed to me as one. It was a mistake. It was. His voice carried a register I'd never heard from him. Not coldness. Not irony. Curiosity. Adrian Moretti didn't deal in curiosity. Adrian Moretti dealt in conclusions. "Mr. Moretti," I started, and the words came out too steady, because everything beneath them was shaking. "Give it back, please. It was a personal file. It was never meant to end up here. I'm aware it wasn't. Then, please." He tilted his head a fraction. He lifted the page, but didn't unfold it, turning it over between his fingers like a man weighing a playing card. Those long fingers, the nails short and clean, handled the paper with a care that bordered on insulting. "You wrote this, sir." A straight answer. "Holloway. Yes or no?" I tried to say no. The word climbed as far as the roof of my mouth and died there, because lying to Adrian Moretti inside his own office at 9:40 on a Friday morning was a feat that not even I, 5 years deep in small administrative untruths, could manage. I swallowed hard. I lifted my chin. Yes, that was when he laughed. Again, this time with no door between us, right there in front of me. The laugh broke low and brief, through the nose first and then the mouth, a single syllable that held far more surprise than amusement. It was the first time in 5 years I'd seen his coldness fracture, and the fracture had the precise shape of a man who'd just found something he hadn't expected to find, inside a black leather folder. "Mr. Moretti, you may go, Holloway. I'm sorry. You may go back to your desk." I looked at the page. He tracked my gaze, in no hurry whatsoever, like someone sounding out a new alphabet. He didn't return it. "The page," I said. "It stays with me." "Sir, it stays with me, Holloway." I had nothing to answer with. I left. I shut the door. I crossed to my desk and sat. I stared at the screen for a solid minute without taking in a single letter. The air conditioning droned faintly above my head, and still my face burned, as though every drop of blood in me had decided to surge upward at once. Phoebe texted to ask whether I'd smashed a mug yet that morning. I sent back a single line. "Need to talk to you later." 3 dots came up. Then, "Honey, what happened?" I didn't reply. The morning crawled, as if someone had halved the speed of time. Adrian left the office twice. Both times he passed my desk without stopping. The first, he dropped off an envelope for Lorenzo. The second, he asked for water. And that was the time he paused at my chair and lingered a beat longer than he needed to before moving on. I knew he was looking at me. I kept my chin tucked over the keyboard as though last month's spreadsheet held something genuinely fascinating. I felt the warmth of him near my shoulder before he stepped away, and it took me several more long minutes to type even one line that made sense. At noon, Marco Ferraro came up. The casino captain was a man in his early 40s, broad through the shoulders, loud and entirely at home, treating the antechamber like his own living room. He gave me a clipped nod and went in. The door stayed ajar. I didn't close it. Not out of nosiness, out of self-preservation. It was the first meeting of my shift where I needed to know whether the temperature in that room was running hot or cold. "Marco," Adrian said, in his level tone, "about Lake Forest. The Castellanis want to renegotiate before Friday." "No, Adrian." I said no. A pause. "You've got something else." Marco exhaled. Ice clinked against glass. Adrian was drinking water. "Marco, more likely, something stronger. I've got the dinner list," Marco said. "Read it." Marco read off names. I recognized maybe 7. 2 of them were known headaches. Adrian waved each through with a short yes, until one stopped him. "Not that one." "Why?" "Because I said so." "Adrian?" "Marco." Silence. The kind that landed heavier than any instruction. "Anything else?" Adrian asked. "Your girl works too hard," Marco said, in the voice he mistook for friendly. "You ought to cut her loose before she turns into a problem." There was a pause, the length of a blade. "I'm my assistant," Adrian said, and the words came out slow, unhurried, the way he spoke when he was holding something on a tight leash. "Runs this office better than any of your captains runs a single shift. Her hours are not your concern. I only—" Marco swallowed. I heard the air go down his throat. "One more thing," Adrian went on, and his voice shifted, so subtly that only someone who'd spent 5 years listening to that voice could have caught it. "Oh, about the report that reached me this morning. There's a word in it I didn't expect to read. A word. Domestic." I went rigid in my chair. My fingers stalled over the keys. The air vanished from somewhere between my ribs. "I don't recall using that word," Marco said. "I know you didn't. So, I'm only remarking on it." He said it in the tone of a man remarking on the weather. Marco didn't follow, because Marco wasn't the one sitting at my desk on the other side of the wall, skin scalding all the way to the roots of my hair. The word domestic was in my letter. It was the word I'd set down in a paragraph somewhere in the middle, about wanting small things, about waking up and brewing coffee for someone slow to wander into the kitchen, about the sweet terror of wanting an ordinary life with an extraordinary man. I'd written domestic in quotation marks, like a woman mocking her own longing. Adrian had read it, and now he'd dropped the word into the middle of a meeting about the Castellanis, with the exact tone of a man hanging a bell around a cat's neck just to watch whether she keeps moving. Marco changed the subject. He was gone 20 minutes later without so much as a look in my direction. I stayed where I was. My breathing wouldn't fall back into rhythm. The 1 o'clock sun had begun to strike the antechamber window, The reflection of the tower next door, printing a bright square in the corner of my monitor. Phoebe texted again. I answered with one word. Later. Adrian went to lunch with Lorenzo at 2. Passing my desk, he stopped. I looked up against my own will. He was near enough for me to catch his cologne. A dry, woody scent threaded with bergamot. The kind I could have named in pitch darkness after 5 years settling his jacket onto hangers. Holloway. Sir, eat. It wasn't a question. It was an order. I opened my mouth to offer some polite answer, and found he'd already walked on. The afternoon was worse for being ordinary. He came back. He asked for a report. He asked me to get Salvatore on the line. He asked for coffee. Each request was the same request it had always been, except now there was a new layer running beneath it, a layer I knew belonged to him and me alone, one he was letting rise by degrees, like a man warming water with great patience just to see at which exact minute it breaks into a boil. I carried the coffee in with steady hands, set the white porcelain cup down at the precise corner of the desk where he liked it, and turned before he could say a thing. He didn't say a thing. That was worse. At 5:30, as the light in the window began to go gold, he called me back in. He was standing behind the desk, jacket on again, fastening the watch onto his wrist, ready to leave. The Chicago sky behind him had taken on that shade of molten copper that surfaced only a few minutes a day, and his silhouette cut against the glass like a clean incision. Next week, he said, not looking at me. Off-site, Gold Coast, Friday. You're coming with me. I don't do off-site meetings, and sir, you'll do this one. Isn't Lorenzo enough? That was when he looked at me, and the look belonged to a man who'd spent the whole day baiting me with a single word in a crowded room, and who now stood alone in front of me, not yet finished. Lorenzo is enough for a great many things, he said, his voice still low. Not for this one. Sir, Friday, 6 p.m. I'll send the car. He was gone before I could answer. The trace of his cologne hung in the air like a signature. I stood in the middle of the room, the gold light slicing diagonally across the carpet, and two things landed on me at once. That the page I'd sworn I would tear to pieces was still somewhere on that desk, and that the man who had laughed low behind that door this morning was nowhere near done laughing. Chapter 3. Teasing turns to care. That Monday opened with a thin rain drifting over the loop, and a certainty lodged in me. I would pretend the whole weekend away, the Friday before it, the page he hadn't given back, all of it, as though none of it had happened. I crossed the lobby of the Moretti Tower with my head down, the shoulders of my coat soaked through, and rode up to the 47th floor without once meeting my own eyes in the elevator mirror. On Sunday I'd resolved 3 things. Not to think about the letter, not to think about his laugh, not to think about Friday and Gold Coast. I'd broken all 3 before the coffee finished brewing. The antechamber was empty, the way it always was before 8. The gray carpet swallowed my heels, and the recessed ceiling lights woke in slow layers as I moved forward. I powered up the computer, arranged the week's schedule into colored columns, sorted the stack of mail. Every familiar motion handed me back a little of the woman I'd been until the previous Thursday. His office door was shut, and for a moment, I let myself imagine that maybe he'd chosen to forget the whole thing, that maybe we'd slip back into being only the boss and the assistant I knew how to be. The smell of fresh paper and just brewed coffee fed the illusion. I drew a deep breath and made myself believe in it a few minutes longer. The door opened at 8:10. Adrian stepped out in a dark tie, sleeves already free of the jacket, and stopped in front of my desk. The handle sounded louder than it should have, or maybe it was only my ear, tuned too high. "Good morning, Miss Holloway." His voice was the same as any other morning. The look was not. It rested on my face half a second too long, as if checking for something only he knew to search for. "Good morning, Mr. Moretti," I answered, keeping my eyes on the monitor. "I cancel my 10 o'clock. I glanced up without meaning to. "With the Castellanis?" "With the Castellanis. May I note a reason, for the record?" He laid his hand on the edge of my desk. Just the fingers. The skin was clean, the ring on his little finger catching the cold white of the lamp. "Note that I changed my mind." I wrote it down. The pen jumped once, almost imperceptibly, but it jumped. By the time I looked up again, he'd already gone back inside, leaving in his wake that discreet woody trace I'd spent 5 years pretending not to recognize. Bergamot, perhaps, with scorched wood beneath it. I committed it to memory without intending to, as if my nose kept a calendar of its own. The Castellani meeting was pushed to 2:30, and when the clock slid past $2, Lorenzo Bianchi appeared in the antechamber, briefcase tucked under his arm, and that patient look he wore whenever something wasn't sitting right. He nodded to me, knocked twice, and went in. The Castellanis arrived 10 minutes after that, 2 older men in gray suits whom I announced over the intercom before showing them through. The office door opened soon after, and Adrian stood in the frame. Ivy. I was on my feet at once. Not Miss Holloway. Something else. Bring your notebook and come in, he said. But stay by the door. If I ask you for coffee, that's your cue to leave. Coffee, I repeated, pressing the notebook to my chest. Understood. No hesitating. No hesitating. I followed him in and stationed myself near the window, well away from the meeting table. The rain had begun coming at the glass sideways, and the reflected skyscrapers blurred into smears of yellow and blue. The Castellanis held my gaze half a second longer than they needed to. Lorenzo noticed. Adrian noticed before Lorenzo did. He sat without offering anyone else a chair and said, "Begin." The conversation moved in Italian threaded with English. I understood enough to log terms, figures, dates. 20 minutes in, the tone changed. The taller Castellani began using a word I didn't know but recognized by its weight. Adrian turned the ring on his finger once. Slowly, it was his only movement. The air in the room thickened, as though the window had been sealed from the inside. "Ivy," he said, without turning. "Coffee." I was out the door a second later. I closed it with the care of someone lowering the lid of a piano, sat at my desk with my heart loud in my ears, and stared at the clock without taking in the hands. The tower's pipes ticked somewhere far off, and every groan of the building sounded like a decision being reached in the room I'd just stepped out of. 15 minutes later, the Castellanis left at a brisk clip, not looking at me. Lorenzo came behind, paused by my desk, and said low, like a man passing over a key, "He pulled you out on purpose. It was clever. Was it necessary?" Lorenzo hesitated. His eyes dipped for a moment to the badge at my neck, then came back up. It was. The rain ran on into the night. When I finally shut the computer, it was past 10. The floor stood empty, the main lights already down, only my desk lamp still burning, throwing a yellow circle over the papers. I pulled on my coat, took my purse, rode down in the executive elevator, and as I came through the tower doors, I nearly walked into a large man planted on the sidewalk, hands buried in the pockets of his overcoat, a face cut from stone. The rain glanced off his shoulders as if he hadn't registered it. "Miss Holloway," said Dimitri Castellucci, in the tone a person uses to report the weather. Dimitri. Car. He tipped his head toward the black sedan idling at the curb, engine running, windows tinted. I looked at him, then at the rain pouring off the building's gutter in unbroken threads. "I can take the train." "You can, but you won't let me." "No." I got in. He shut the door with that measured gentleness huge men sometimes develop for delicate things, then came around to the driver's side. The interior smelled of new leather and a black coffee left too long in the cup holder. The drive to Lincoln Park usually ran about 20 minutes in traffic. I fixed my eyes on the window and tried not to make conversation, and failed. Was it Mr. Moretti who asked? It was, because of today's meeting. No. Then because of what? Miss Holloway. He found my eyes in the rearview mirror just once, and his chin shifted by 0.5 millimeter, perhaps his private version of patience. He asks. I drive. I laughed before I could stop it. The sound came out odd in the quiet car. Was that advice? It was. I let my head fall back against the seat and watched the rain slide down the glass. The street lamps passed in long smears, and for a moment I let exhaustion answer for me. Let the shame of the previous Thursday settle into some corner I didn't need to visit just then. When we reached my building, Dimitri got out first, opened my umbrella, waited until I was inside the lobby, and only then returned to the car. He didn't wish me good night. He raised 2 fingers. It was the nearest thing to a farewell I'd ever seen him offer. On Tuesday, I worked straight through lunch without noticing. Around 2, a brown paper bag appeared at the edge of my desk, folded with almost surgical care. Steaming ravioli, a fork wrapped in a napkin, a small bottle of sparkling water. No note. The smell of melted butter and sage rose before I'd even opened it. I lifted my head and looked at the closed office door. I didn't knock. I ate slowly, embarrassed by how much I liked it, the warmth of the pasta against the roof of my mouth like a silent confession he'd made me swallow. On Wednesday it happened again. Soup this time, and a slice of the dark bread I'd mentioned months earlier. The morning he'd asked whether I'd had breakfast, and I'd said I skipped lunch because I couldn't stand the building's soups, but loved the dark bread from a bakery on Wells Street. I'd been almost sure he hadn't even lifted his head when I answered. Almost. I touched the hard crust with the tip of my finger and held there too long before biting, working out the size of a memory he'd kept. It came to a head on Wednesday night, the floor empty again, the clock edging past 9, me filing a folder of contracts when I heard the office door open. Adrian came out without his jacket, without his tie, one sleeve rolled to the elbow, a glass in his right hand, and plain exhaustion set into the corner of his mouth. The amber of the whiskey caught my lamp and sent a square of light skating across the ceiling. He stopped in the middle of the antechamber. He looked at me. "You're still here. I'm finishing the Greco contract. Finish it tomorrow. I'd rather have it done." He came to my desk. The carpet muffled his steps, but I felt him approach on my skin before I heard it. He set the glass on the edge, beside the stack of papers. How long? I knew exactly what he meant. I didn't feign otherwise, though everything in me wanted to. How long? What, exactly? Mr. Moretti. The letter. The word hung between us as if it had mass. I kept shuffling the papers to give my hands something to do. My fingertips were cold. My pulse, too warm. Long enough to have learned to keep things to myself. That's not how it looks to me. I raised my chin. It was an accident. It was. Then you can forget it. No. I stood without deciding to. The chair scraped the floor, a short, dry sound that split the silence of the whole floor. We stood side by side with the width of my desk between us, and even so the distance felt smaller than it should have. He didn't move, neither did I. The woody scent now carried a breath of his whiskey and something warmer underneath it, closer. His breathing was controlled in the way only someone making an effort can manage. I knew the effort, because mine was identical. "Mr. Moretti. Adrian. Adrian," I repeated, and the word grazed my throat. "What do you want?" He held my gaze for a stretch too long to be comfortable. I watched the answer cross his face and stop short of his mouth. His jaw tightened once. His grip on the glass closed a fraction. When he finally spoke, it was low. "Go home, Ivy. Dimitri's waiting downstairs." He left ahead of me. He crossed the antechamber, stepped into the executive elevator, and the door slid shut without him looking back. I stayed where I was a full second with my hand on the edge of the desk, my heart slamming at my ribs, not sure whether I wanted to cry or laugh or both at once. His glass sat there still, the ice melting by slow degrees. I went down. Dimitri was in the car, exactly as Adrian had said. We didn't trade a word the whole drive. The streets were emptier than on Monday, the rain thinner now, almost mist. When we reached my building, he handed back the umbrella with the same ceremony as before, and said, without looking at me, "Miss Holloway, yes, Friday's going to be long. The Gold Coast meeting." He nodded once. "Anything I should know?" Dimitri was quiet for half a second. It was long enough. His fingers tapped the wheel once, then went still. Stay close to him. I went up, locked the apartment door, turned on the kitchen light, and realized I'd left the folder of contracts behind on my desk at the office. It didn't matter. I'd collect it in the morning. I drank a glass of water, changed, lay down without eating, and slept with the sense of having crossed a whole week in 3 days. His name stayed in my mouth for hours, long after I'd closed my eyes. Chapter 4. Crossfire in the Gold Coast. The gallery occupied a restored townhouse on East Erie Street. White walls, pale marble underfoot, vast canvases worth more than most people will ever lay eyes on in a lifetime. I arrived a little before 6 in the evening, Lorenzo at my side and a folder clamped to my chest. The appointment Adrian had insisted on in that low voice the Friday before, with the same exactness he brought to closing any door. Friday had threaded itself through me since morning, like a rope drawn taut, and every hour reeled in another millimeter, until I could feel the knot at the base of my skull and the taste of metal under my tongue. Inside, the air smelled of fresh floor wax and some woody perfume sprayed not long before, probably to mask whatever it was meant to mask. The recessed ceiling lights washed the paintings in gold, and each footstep rang off the marble as though the whole house were taking note of who had come in. "You stay near the back wall," Lorenzo said as we climbed the 3 entrance steps, his voice low, his lips barely moving. "Don't talk. Don't look at the Russian. Take notes." I noted that before you said it. "Good." He tugged his jacket straight with a small motion, more for himself than for me, and shouldered the inner door open. Lorenzo was like that, sparing with every movement, as if any extra exertion were a luxury he couldn't afford on a heavy day. Adrian was already inside, dressed in black, a dark tie, the ring on his finger, a whiskey glass in his left hand worn like an accessory. Marco Ferraro paced near the window, and Dimitri held the door as though he were part of the building's frame. When I entered, Adrian looked at me only once. It was enough to tell me he'd fought the idea of bringing me to this meeting right up to the last minute, and that the war inside him still hadn't ended. I crossed to the back wall and measured steps, the low heel of my shoe sinking a little into the rug laid over part of the marble. I set the folder on a side chair, opened the notebook, tested the pen. Everything became ritual. Everything became an anchor. Yegor Volkov arrived 15 minutes after we did, 2 men in tow, and the broad smile of someone who'd practiced it in the mirror. He greeted Adrian in Russian, then in English with a polished accent, and kissed the ring in the air as if it were an old running joke. His 2 enforcers held 3 paces back, hands folded in front of them, eyes fixed on some dead point on the wall. They settled at the round table in the center of the gallery, and the negotiation opened in the register of afternoon tea. I took notes. Percentages on the port routes, division of the southern warehouses, a mutual pledge of non-interference in the casinos. Yegor spoke slowly, smiled often, and with each proposal hauled the rope a little tighter. Adrian answered in short sentences, never lifting his voice, never shifting his body in the chair. Every 5 minutes Lorenzo traded a look with me that said, "Keep writing, don't raise your head." The clock on the far wall counted out the minutes with a low tick that struck me as far too loud. I caught the smell of the whiskey in Adrian's glass from 3 meters off, or imagined I did, because by then every one of my senses had been deliberately turned up, straining to catch in advance something that hadn't yet begun. 40 minutes into the conversation, Adrian set his glass down on the table with a dry sound. "No," Yegor spread his hands. "Adrian, my friend, we're not friends." And the answer is still no. You force me to look for less cordial roads. I'm sparing you the trouble of faking cordiality. The Russian laughed without the laugh reaching his eyes. His mouth bent into a rehearsed arc, while his pupils stayed fixed and cold. 2 pinheads. He rose, squared his jacket, gave a small bow in my direction that turned my stomach, and left with the 2 men behind him. The front door shut with a dry weight. For perhaps 20 seconds, no one in the room said a word. The silence that came down had texture, a silence of marble, of glass, of held breath, each of us tucked into a different corner of it. "He'll be back," Marco said. "He will," Adrian answered. "Just not today." Lorenzo laid down his pen. "I wouldn't bet on that." Adrian looked at me. He was about to say something. He didn't. The financier waiting in the VIP room at the rear of the gallery was 2 doors away, an 8-figure contract balanced on his knee, waiting for a signature only Adrian could provide. Adrian stood, buttoned his jacket with those 2 mechanical motions I'd memorized without meaning to, and started toward the side corridor. He stopped halfway. He turned. "Ivy." "Yes." "You stay with Lorenzo. In this room. Don't leave." "All right." He went through the door into the VIP room. The gallery sank into a strange quiet, the kind that forms after something important has walked out. The gold light seemed a little colder, the paintings a little larger, and I pressed the notebook into my lap with both thumbs. It didn't last. The first shot came from the kitchen at the back, a dry crack, then 2 more. Then the sound of glass breaking that matched none of the paintings on the walls. Lorenzo had my arm in the next instant and threw me behind the partition. Marco shouted something I couldn't make out. Dimitri already had his gun up, crossing the gallery in 3 strides, shouting Adrian's name in a voice I'd never heard come out of that man. "Stay down," Lorenzo said in my ear, his breath hot and short. "Don't get up. The back door." I know. I felt the cold marble through the fabric of my skirt, the hard line of the baseboard against my back, and my heart beating somewhere that wasn't my chest, my throat, my temple, my wrist, all at once. The shooters came in through the kitchen corridor. I watched 3 shadows pass on the far side of the partition and counted them by their steps. More shots. A painting dropped off the wall 3 meters from me, and the glass scattered across the marble in a tiny, glittering rain. I pressed my forehead to my knee and tried to breathe through my nose, counting slowly to 4, then to 6, then giving up on counting. Lorenzo rose a little, looked, dropped back. The VIP room's blocked. They came in on the wrong side. "Adrian, he knows." Another shot, nearer. Lorenzo shoved me left, toward a narrow passage that linked the main hall to a small storeroom set behind the white walls. We slipped out of the shooters, sightline the instant 2 rounds struck the partition behind us, and punched out 2 holes the size of coins. We ran bent low to the storeroom. Lorenzo locked the door from inside, and set his back to the wood, his breathing dragging in and out at an uneven pace. "Stay here," he said, gasping. "Adrian will kill me if I leave you." He'll kill me worse if I don't reach him. I'm going to try. You're not. I am. It's the only play. Lorenzo. Ivy. He gripped my shoulders once. Hard. His fingers dug into the fabric of my blouse, and I felt the heat of his palm through the thin cotton. If I'm not back in 3 minutes, you open this door and run right until you hit the service exit. Dimitri will be in the alley, and if he isn't, he will be. He left. The door closed behind him, and I was alone in the storeroom, my heart climbing into my throat, distant shots and shouts in 2 languages I couldn't tell apart. The room smelled of old cardboard, and the acrylic paint of stored packaging, and a single yellow bulb hung from a wire over my head. I counted to 180. I counted to 300. No one came. I cracked the door. The corridor was empty. The smell of gunpowder had reached even here, laced with something acrid that must have been the smoke of burning paint. I moved in a crouch, hand on the wall, counting the steps to the corner that opened onto the main hall. That was when I heard his voice on the other side of the wall, muffled by the gunfire, shouting my name between 2 dry cracks. Closer. One more shot, nearer still, and a short grunt I recognized before I could process it. I heard steps crushing glass. A body hit the wall, his breathing closing on the corner in clipped bursts. When I reached the corner, the heavy footfall stopped on the other side, and I went rigid. Ivy. It was him. Adrian came around the corner with blood at the corner of his mouth, his jacket torn at the shoulder, the gun still in his right hand. His chest rose and fell at a rhythm far too controlled for a man who just walked through crossfire, as though he were forcing his own body to obey. When he saw me braced against the wall, something in his face dropped from a height I'd never witnessed. It wasn't relief. It was something else, colder, that I couldn't put a name to. Are you whole? I am. Look at me. I looked. His eyes were dark in a different way, stripped of the filter of control, of the layer that ordinarily covered everything. For the first time, he was looking at me with nothing between us. Whole? He said again. Whole? He slid the gun into the holster under his jacket and pulled me against his chest for half a second, his hand open at the nape of my neck, a pressure that asked for no permission. I caught his scent close up. Whiskey, soap, fresh sweat, the rough weave of the jacket against my cheek. Then he set me back with the same motion, took my hand, and started pulling me down the corridor away from the hall. The negotiation, I said without thinking. No. Adrian, the financier, was. No. We pushed through a service door, went down a narrow flight whose treads creaked in a high register that seemed to announce us, and came out through a steel door that opened straight onto the gallery's side alley. The freezing street air struck my face with a dry shock. The armored car waited with the engine running. Dimitri opened the rear door without a word. Adrian pushed me in first, climbed in after, and the door slammed before I'd drawn 2 breaths. Safe house, he said. On it, Dimitri answered, and the car pulled away. I let my head fall back against the seat. The leather was cold and gave off the faint smell of professional cleaning, the kind that doesn't quite hide that something there has been cleaned more than once. I was shaking. I hadn't noticed until that second. My hands, my shoulders, my chin, all of it shaking, and I couldn't stop, even pressing my fingers together. Adrian looked at me. He reached over with his right hand, laid his open palm over mine, slowly, and held it. He didn't speak. He didn't let go. We crossed the lights of the north side in silence. The signs slid past the window in colored blurs, red, gold, white, and every traffic light cut his face in a different cast. The blood at the corner of his mouth had dried into a thin line he didn't trouble to wipe. Now and then he turned his head a fraction to check that I was still breathing properly. His hand was warm. Mine. Ice. He didn't mind. He tightened his grip each time the car braked, and it was like that, with that steady, wordless pressure, that I came back, little by little, into my own body. Dimitri spoke only once during the drive, eyes never leaving the road. Marco's fine. Lorenzo's fine. 2 shooters down. The rest is your problem, boss. It will be, Adrian said, at the right moment. First we close the city against him, then we collect. The line hung in the car like a cold, deferred promise. I knew what it meant. Not immediate revenge, but the kind of siege Adrian assembled in silence over weeks, until the only way out left was through his door. For some reason, knowing that steadied me rather than scaring me. When we reached the penthouse building, Dimitri rolled to a stop in the closed garage. The engine cutting out echoed off the empty concrete. Adrian got out first, opened my door, and offered his hand as though I were made of porcelain. He didn't take his eyes off my face as we rode up in the private elevator. The reflection of the two of us in the mirrored walls showed a couple I had no clearance to recognize. Him in a torn jacket, me with my hair come loose and my blouse creased, our hands still joined in the space between us. He said nothing in the corridor. At the penthouse door, he drew the keys from his pocket, opened it, let me go in first, came in behind me, and locked it. The bolt made a low click that carried across the dark wood floor. The penthouse lay in shadow, only one indirect light burning in a corner of the room, the panoramic glass showing Chicago spread out below like a lit circuit board. He set his back against the locked door and looked at me from across the room. Ivy. Yes. He drew a deep breath. For the first time since I'd walked into the gallery that afternoon, he looked like a whole man, stripped of armor. And what came next was not the voice of Chicago's Mafia boss. It was something else, deeper, more bare, that hung in the air between us like a key turning in a lock. We need to talk. Chapter 5. The Key. The penthouse door shut behind us with the low sound of a heavy bolt, and for a moment, I felt as though the whole world had been left on the other side of it. Adrian stayed with his back to me, his hand still on the handle, his broad shoulders rising and falling slowly inside the dark coat. His head dipped forward for a second, almost too slight to catch, and it was in that smallest of movements that I grasped the size of what he was holding in. I didn't move. I wouldn't have known where to go. We need to talk, he said again, and this time, the words came out lower, slower, as if he were prying them loose one by one from somewhere he'd sealed shut long ago. I took 2 steps into the room. The dim lights traced soft edges along the dark furniture, and the city outside went on living behind the glass without a sound. Lincoln Park felt like a whole country away. I could still smell smoke at the ends of my hair, still taste the metal of fear at the back of my throat, still feel the fresh memory of the gallery corridor pressed against my back. The rug took my steps as though it wanted to hide me. Adrian turned. He shrugged off his coat with restrained movements and laid it over the arm of the couch, smoothing the fabric once, and the gesture was so out of place it read like a confession. He went to the corner bar, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, and stopped. He didn't drink. He studied the liquid, as if it were the only thing left in the world that still obeyed him. Sit, he said. I'm not tired. I know. Sit anyway. I took the armchair by the library wall, against the oak shelving, because it was the spot farthest from him in the room, not out of fear, out of an old instinct, the same one that had made me write letters I never sent. Adrian saw it. He settled on the arm of the couch, sat at an angle, far enough to give me room and close enough that his tension reached me across the rug. I didn't know they were going to hit today, he began. If I'd known, you'd never have set foot in that gallery. I know. You shouldn't know. You should be angry. I nearly laughed. It came out through the nose, a short sound with no humor in it. Adrian, I've worked beside you for 5 years. I know the difference between what you calculate and what gets away from you. He held my eyes a second longer than he needed to. The glass stayed forgotten in his hand, the whiskey tipping slowly against the crystal. 5 years, he repeated, and for 4 of them I didn't know how to see you. The sentence came to rest in the middle of the room. It was worse than if he'd shouted. I let my head fall against the side of the armchair and drew a deep breath. I said. Don't what? Don't talk about these things today. I just heard gunfire 3 meters from me. I've got no defenses left. I know, he said quietly. That's exactly why I'm saying it. He stood. He set the glass on the sideboard without having touched it, and the click of crystal on wood was the only punctuation in that silence. He crossed the room slowly, with the controlled calm he used when choosing where to step inside a negotiation. He stopped at the balcony, slid the glass door open, and stood leaning against the frame, giving me the hard line of his jaw and his tight shoulders against the Chicago sky. The autumn breeze drifted into the apartment and lifted my bangs, carrying the smell of river and wet asphalt. Come, he said, without looking. I rose. I went. The balcony was narrow, dark stone underfoot and a low iron rail. Below, the loop pulsed in yellow light, the river slicing through the city like a glowing scar. Adrian made space for me at his side. I rested my forearms on the rail. The cold bit through the thin fabric of my blouse and I didn't care. His shoulder was centimeters from mine, and that strip of air between us felt charged. For years I waited for your voice in the morning, he said, looking out at the city. Before the coffee, before the reports, before whatever the day was going to demand of me. It was the first thing I sorted in my head. Is she in yet? I tightened my grip on the rail. The metal was freezing against my palm. Adrian, let me finish. Otherwise it won't come out. I went quiet. The office felt empty when you went down for lunch. I couldn't work right. I invented meetings to get you back sooner. He laughed, soundlessly, just a short shift of the shoulder. Me, Ivy, inventing meetings. Over an assistant. I wasn't only an assistant. I know you weren't. I'm the one who pretended you were. My throat closed. I kept my eyes forward, because looking at him would unmake me faster than I wanted. The city lights wavered at the edge of my vision. Why? I asked. Because everything that becomes important to me turns into a target. His voice stayed low, controlled, but I heard the fracture in it. My father became a target. The people he loved became targets. I grew up learning that feeling has a price. And then you showed up, with your impossible schedule and your sarcasm, and you started costing more than anything else. I felt the first tear fall without warning. I didn't wipe it away. I had no strength left to pretend. You read the letter, I said, my voice catching halfway. Why did you laugh? He turned his face toward me. His dark eyes were gentler than I'd ever seen them. It wasn't amusement. It was old astonishment, held back over weeks. Because no one had ever seen me like that, he answered. No one had ever described me as a man before, only as an empire. You wrote about the way I hold the glass when I'm tired, about the pause I take before saying no. Ivy, no one has seen me tired in 10 years. You saw it, and even so, you chose to come in earlier the next day. 1 tear became 2, became 3. I bit my lip to stop the rest. The wind pulled a strand of my hair toward him, and he followed the motion with his eyes. I was ashamed of that letter. I know. I still am. There's no reason to be anymore. He turned to face me fully. He lifted his hand and, for the first time in 5 years, set his fingers to my face. It was a careful touch, as though he were making sure I wouldn't dissolve under it. His skin was warm despite the wind, and there was a faint callus on the pad of his thumb that brushed my cheek and carried a tear away with it. I won't be a hidden weakness, I whispered, my voice breaking in the middle. And I spent 5 years swearing to myself it wasn't love, that it was exhaustion, that it was habit. I lied. It was love. It is love. And even so, I can't be the pretty secret you keep in a drawer. If that's how it has to be, I'd rather go back to bringing you coffee and pretending. He was silent a beat. He drew a long breath. He rested his forehead against mine. His breathing trembled once before it steadied. You won't be a secret, he said. Never again. I closed my eyes. His breath touched my mouth. Warm, near, still held in check. There's something I need to give you, he murmured. I'd thought about it long before today. The shooting only rushed it. He moved his hand from my face to the inner pocket of his jacket and drew out a small key, golden, no key ring, and held it on his open palm between us. The cold city light caught its surface and made it look older than it was. The penthouse is yours too, he said. Not as an employee, not as a hidden lover, as the woman I want to find in the kitchen when I come home, as a person who decides for herself whether she wants to walk in or walk out. The key is the only way I know to say that without lying. I looked at his palm, at the long fingers, the matte gold signet on his little finger with the family crest, the line of veins running to the wrist where the watch ended. I reached out and took the key. It weighed less than I'd expected. It weighed everything. The metal was warm, holding the heat of his pocket. Adrian, tell me, I don't want to be loved from a distance. I've already been loved from a distance. He cupped my face in both hands. His palms covered my cheeks completely, and I closed my eyes for a second because it was impossible to hold the intensity of that look so near. I've loved from a distance too, he said. I don't recommend it. It was the first time he'd made me laugh since the gallery. A small laugh, wet, threaded with tears, that died the next instant because he leaned in and kissed me. It was a slow kiss, not the kiss of the man I'd invented in the letter. Better than that, because it was real. His mouth was warm, firm, unhurried, and I felt his fingertips close carefully at the nape of my neck, as if he were afraid I'd vanish between thought and movement. I caught the front of his shirt and felt the costly fabric crush between my fingers, and beneath it, his chest rose and fell in a rhythm that was no longer the one from before. His heart beat as loud as mine. When we drew apart, he looked at me up close, not letting go of my face. Stay, he said, low. I'm already staying. He took my hand. He shut off the lights of the room one by one as we moved down the penthouse corridor, and the bedroom door closed behind us without a sound. Morning light filtered slowly through the balcony when I opened my eyes. I lay on my side, wrapped in his dark robe, which smelled of cedar and stored whiskey, and for a second I didn't know where I was. It took me 2 more to remember. I smiled to myself against the pillow. the heavy fabric of the robe brushing my skin like a promise that had kept itself. I got up. I crossed the corridor barefoot, the cold floor under my soles, and the smell of fresh coffee reached me before I did. Adrian stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, barefoot too, in black trousers and a gray t-shirt I'd never seen. He caught me coming in the reflection of the glass before I spoke. He said nothing. He just poured a second cup and slid it toward me across the counter, stopping it on exactly the wrong side, the side where, for 5 years at the office, I'd kept grabbing his mugs by mistake. I took it. I smiled without looking up. "You noticed," I said. "I've noticed everything you do for 5 years. Ivy, you'll have to get used to it." I sipped. Strong coffee, no sugar, the way I drank it. The steam rose and blurred my sight for a second. I looked at him over the rim of the cup. Adrian was watching me in a way I'd never been watched, as if he were confirming, paragraph by paragraph, that I was still there. "Why the face?" I asked. "I don't think I've believed it yet." "Believed what?" "You in my kitchen." Heat climbed into my face. I looked down at the coffee. He came around the counter, stopped behind me, set both hands on the granite at either side of my body, and pressed his mouth to my hair for a second. No kiss, just resting there, like a man dropping anchor. His chest touched my back lightly, and I felt his breath settle on my neck. "We're going to have to talk about a lot of things," he said quietly. "I know. About Yegor. About how to bring this to the family. About what changes in your routine and what doesn't change in my work. I know, but not now." "Not now," I agreed. We stayed like that for a span I didn't want to measure. Outside, the city woke in golden light, the buildings throwing one another back, as though recognizing each other. I thought, without saying it, that the most shameful letter of my life had carried me to that kitchen, and that maybe shame wasn't the right word for what I'd felt when I wrote it. The intercom buzzed. Adrian stepped away slowly, and the cold rushed back into the place his body had filled. He answered. Dimitri's voice came through, dry, clipped as ever, but carrying a different weight. "Yegor wants a peace meeting," he said. "Today," says to name the place. Adrian looked at me over the handset. His hand found mine on the counter, his fingers threading into mine with a new firmness that asked for neither permission nor apology. And I understood, the next second, that the key I'd taken the night before opened more than a single door. Chapter 6. The Moretti's Woman. The armored car rolled to a stop in the basement of the Moretti Tower just after noon. The garage smelled of cold concrete and engine oil, and the fluorescent light threw long shadows down the cement columns. Dimitri opened my door before Adrian could, and I stepped out with the penthouse key still tucked in my coat pocket, the small weight knocking against my thigh with every stride. One key, square at the head, cold through the fabric, and even so I had the sense that it burned. Adrian waited for me on the far side of the car and held out his hand. I took it without hesitating, and the gesture cost less than I'd braced for. "Ready?" he asked. "No." Good answer. The executive elevator climbed straight to the rooftop in near total silence, only the low hum of the mechanism cutting the air. 47 floors of Chicago opened up across the glass wall at the back, the blue-gray lake far below, the wind battering the building without ever getting in. I caught the reflection of the three of us in the cabin's chrome mirror, Adrian in a dark suit, me in the beige coat creased from the night before. Dimitri planted up front. He had his back to us, hands folded, saying nothing. His only response to my hand in Adrian's was a brief half-smile at the corner of his mouth that was gone before I could be sure of it. "You smiled," I said. "No," he answered. Adrian laughed quietly at my side. A sound held in his chest, felt more than heard. The door opened onto the executive rooftop with a hydraulic sigh. I'd stood up there a handful of times across 5 years, always with a clipboard, always logging who was present. This time I came in with no notebook, no pen, Adrian's hand at my back, exactly at the height of my waist, and the strange feeling of crossing a border no one had drawn on the floor. The space smelled of old cigar, whiskey, and Lorenzo's woody cologne, which I knew from a distance. The leather armchairs stood arranged in a half-circle facing the glass, and the heavy curtains had been drawn back to let the afternoon light pour through. Lorenzo Bianchi stood near the low table in a flawless gray suit, studying the city. Marco Ferrara was lighting a cigarette on the other side, his face shut, the lighter's flame flickering briefly in his dark eyes, the crystal ashtray resting on the low table within reach. 2 younger captains spoke quietly by the bar, crystal glasses in hand, ice turning slowly. When they saw us, everyone went still. Adrian didn't let go of my hand. "Gentlemen," he began, in that low voice of a man who never needs to raise it, "I brought Ivy here today because you need to hear one thing from my own mouth. She is not the assistant from the office on the 47th floor. She is the woman I've chosen to share my life with. From today, any information that touches her, touches the Morettis. Any threat against her is treated as a threat to the family. If anyone in this room has a problem with that, speak now." The silence stretched. I felt my own heart beat and the pulse joined to his, louder than I wanted. Marco let the smoke out slowly, the gray trail rising straight up in the still air. "Adrian," he said, "with all due respect, this is madness. This puts a target on her the size of the whole tower. Yegor already sent men into one of your galleries. What do you think he does once he learns there's a woman who matters?" "The target was painted yesterday," Adrian answered, not moving. "The only difference is that now the city will know who's firing back at my side. It's not the same, Adrian. An assistant is an assistant. A Moretti's woman is a weakness with a name and an address. You're serving it up on a plate." "Marco, I'm not finished." Marco took a step forward, the cigarette burning a centimeter down between his fingers without his noticing. "I watched your father make this mistake. I watched what came after. I won't stand here and clap while the sun repeats it." The whole room held. Lorenzo lifted his eyes from the glass slowly, not yet stepping in. I felt Adrian's hand close on mine, this time as both a warning and an alliance. "I know what I am," I said, before Adrian could answer, and the steadiness of my own voice surprised me. "I worked inside this family for 5 years. I know how its world works. I know the name of every captain, the name of every enemy, and the name of everything you don't say out loud. I'm not here asking to be protected. I'm here because I chose to be, and because, with all due respect, Mr. Ferraro, I became a target the moment that letter came out of the wrong printer. The difference now is that I'm not alone." Marco held my gaze a long time. The cigarette burned down to the filter between his fingers. Lorenzo chose that exact second to speak. "Marco, she's right, and Adrian's right about the target. The question isn't whether we mark her or not anymore. It's whether we defend her together or pretend we didn't notice." Marco crushed the cigarette out in the crystal ashtray, holding his finger on the filter a fraction of a second longer, as though snuffing his last objection along with it. "Fine," he said, with no pleasure in it, but no more argument either. "Welcome, Ivy. I pray to God you two know what you're doing. Whatever she is, she already was yesterday," Dmitri put in from the corner, never taking his hand from his pocket. "We were just too ashamed to call her by her name." Marco rounded on him. "You spoke. I spoke. You never speak. Today I spoke." Adrian swallowed a laugh. So did I. The tension in the room eased half a centimeter, and that was enough for everyone to breathe. Lorenzo came over. He greeted Adrian with a short nod, then turned to me with his usual measured courtesy, his hand out, the grip firm without making a show of it. "About Yegor," he said, steering the room back to business. "We need this closed before the afternoon's out." Adrian drew his phone from the inner pocket of his jacket and dialed without checking any contact list. When the other side picked up, he spoke in dense Italian, short sentences, the name Castellani landing twice. I watched his jaw tighten once at the answer, watched the ring turn on his finger, watched his silence on the line stretch 2 seconds too long before he let out a low concordato. He hung up and looked at Lorenzo. "The Castellanis are in neutral ground. The Drake, tomorrow. Yegor's going to have 3 families across the table from him, not one." Lorenzo nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth lifting a millimeter. Good, Lorenzo agreed, and let a sideways, more personal smile through. "And it's good, Adrian, to see you decide something for the right reason for the first time in 10 years. He left before Adrian could answer. Marco followed, with a dry nod to me that carried more respect than approval, and the glass door hummed faintly as it closed. The younger captains came to greet me one at a time, calm, rehearsed, as if somewhere between the elevator and the exit they'd already decided that this woman standing beside their boss wasn't going anywhere. Each handshake came with a brief word of welcome, and none lasted longer than it had to. When the rooftop emptied, Dmitri gave Adrian a last nod, threw me a short look, the same silent counsel from the car, stay close to him, and shut the glass door behind him with an almost paternal care. We were alone. Adrian walked to the edge, set his hand on the stone parapet, and stood looking out at the city. The sun was beginning to drop, gold and heavy, spread over the skyscrapers like honey poured slow. I pulled my phone from my pocket and found 3 messages from Phoebe stacked one on top of the other. "Are you alive? Come get coffee now, honey. I swear I'm coming over there," and called. She answered before the second ring. "Ivy, I'm in one piece. I saw it on the news. Gallery, gunfire. I saw the Moretti name. Phoebe, don't tell me you were there." I was there. Silence on the other end. Then a long breath, one of hers, the breath of a barista who's seen it all. "Honey, do you know what you're doing?" "No," I swallowed, "but I know who I'm doing it with. That's the worst and the best answer you've ever given me." A pause. "Coffee tomorrow. Ground floor, 7 in the morning, and you tell me everything you're allowed to tell me. Deal." And Ivy, "Yes, if he hurts you, I'm coming over there. I'm not afraid of any mafia." I laughed. "Wet. I know you're not." I hung up, put the phone away, felt the cold wind brush the back of my neck, and crossed the rooftop, my heels tapping lightly on the stone. I leaned on the parapet beside him. The wind worried at my hair, dragged a strand across my eyes. Without turning his face, Adrian reached over and tucked it behind my ear. His fingers were warm, rough where the callus was, gentle in the touch. He took the wallet from his back pocket and opened it. From inside he drew a sheet folded in 4, marked with the precise wear of tired paper, the creases gone deep from being made and unmade many times. It was my letter. I knew it before I'd even seen the ink. "You kept it," I said. In a whisper the wind nearly carried off. "I said I would." "You said it in your head, not out loud." "Even so." He eased the corner open, carefully, just enough to show it was there, then folded it back and returned it to the wallet's pocket like a man setting a relic into the one spot where it fit the rest of his life. "Why that one?" I asked, turning my body a little toward his. "If I were you, I'd have burned it for the shame it caused." "Because it didn't cause shame," he answered, without turning his face. "It caused all of this." He gave a short tip of his head, taking in the rooftop, the city, the glass, the silence between us. Me standing there at his side. I looked out at the city with him. Chicago was kindling into orange, the lake mirroring the sky, dark buildings beginning to wink in their highest windows. A siren cut through somewhere far off and was swallowed by the height. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the thin fabric of the suit and, beneath it, the steady warmth of his body. Adrian wrapped his arm around my back and held my shoulder firmly, and it was exactly in that second, with no warning, that a shadow crossed my mind, light and quick, like a bird flicking past against the glass, and was gone before I could name it. I closed my eyes for an instant. I breathed deep. The smell of his coat, the warmth of his hand on my arm, the far-off sound of an L train cutting through the loop below, the low moan of the wind between the rooftop's panes. When I opened my eyes again, the thought had already passed, as if it had never come at all. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, quietly, his voice humming against my temple. "About you," I lied, smiling. "Nothing else." He kissed the top of my head, lingering, unhurried. He pressed my shoulder a little harder, like a man confirming a name in the silence. And I stayed there, with the key to a penthouse in my pocket and my letter folded in his, watching Chicago give itself over to the night, safe for the first time in 5 years. Lena here, that wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. For 2 years, Ivy Holloway believed Adrian Moretti would be hers forever. Then an ambush nearly killed him, and the truth that came afterward was even crueler. To keep him alive, Ivy had to do the one thing capable of destroying him from the inside. Look into his eyes, in the hospital room, and tell him she never loved him, that she'd grown tired, that she'd confused fascination with love, that she wasn't born to take care of a broken man. She saw the exact moment something died inside him. Adrian survived the bullets. But the man who walked out of that hospital was no longer the same. He swore he'd make her pay for every tear she tore from him. And when he discovered the secret she carried, the revenge would be slow and personal. And when he finally understood that Ivy might have left to save him, the secret she carried could already change everything. Because if even her love was a lie to protect him, what else did she hide while he bled alone, destroyed by the woman who swore to stay? And what if the child she carried wasn't only hers, but the final proof that he should never have trusted anyone? Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.